Now to Belarus, where relations with the United States appear to be warming up following a meeting between President Trump's envoy, John Cole, and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Following the meeting, Mr. Lukashenko pardoned 52 prisoners on humanitarian grounds and then deported them to neighbouring Lithuania. 52 is far fewer than the 1,300 President Trump requested be released a month ago. After they were released, the US announced that it would reopen its embassy in the Belarusian capital, Minsk, and lift sanctions on the state-run airline Belavia. President Lukashenko praised Donald Trump's peacemaking efforts and said, "Our task is to stand with Trump." Well, John E. Herbst is Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and a former US ambassador to Ukraine and Uzbekistan. Welcome to DW. Why is Donald Trump suddenly so interested in Belarus?
It seems that President Trump believes that Lukashenko might help him persuade Putin to stop his aggression in Ukraine and make peace. I don't think that hope will be vindicated.
Where does that hope come from?
Well, we know that President Trump would like to achieve a durable peace to Moscow's war in Ukraine. He said that multiple times. He also said first he could do that within 24 hours, then it might take him a month. Now he understands it's harder to do. And that's a laudable goal. For some reason, though, President Trump has decided to do this by offering concessions and flowers to Putin directly. And he's been doing this since January or February without any result because Putin wants to continue the war. And of course, Lukashenko is a trusty ally of Putin. So he thinks that maybe Lukashenko could help in this charm offensive to persuade the aggressor, Putin, to stop aggression. But that's not a realistic approach.
What does Alexander Lukashenko get out of this?
Well, Lukashenko has always been a little bit concerned about being too close to the Kremlin. He's always sought to have at least a bit of a relationship with the West and especially the United States, so he's not firmly in Putin's bear hug. So his aim, I think, is very clear. And it makes sense for him to do this.
That's quite interesting. So you don't believe that Belarus, that Lukashenko is already firmly within Russia's bear hug, because that's the way it looks to those of us who don't follow these things on a sort of day-by-day basis.
He is firmly within the Kremlin embrace, yes, but he would like it to be a little bit less tight, and he would like to have a bit of room so he doesn't always need to do what Putin would like and doesn't always need to be at Putin's beck and call.
Well, that sounds like a dangerous course of action.
It's just a matter of degree.
The US closed its embassy in Minsk in February 2022 after Russia used Belarus as a springboard for its invasion of Ukraine. How do you think Kyiv is likely to view this normalization of relations between the US and Belarus?
Well, this obviously is not something which the United States' traditional allies and partners celebrate. I mean, Lukashenko is a thug. He runs a harsh authoritarian regime. He has enabled, partly, Putin's aggression in Ukraine. So this is not a good look for American diplomacy. It doesn't serve American interests properly understood. But, it was President Trump who was elected. He has the right to conduct his policy that he sees fit. And Americans have the right to point out the inadequacies of those policies.
The Belarusian opposition leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she's recognized by some people, by some countries, as Belarus's rightful president. She's warned that easing US sanctions on Belarus could also benefit Russia. What do you think?
Well, there's no question that Lukashenko is a close partner of the Kremlin. He's been part of the Eurasian Economic Union, Putin's medieval monstrosity for ordering economic relations in the post-Soviet space. And so to the extent that Lukashenko does better, that does help Putin. So she has a very good point.
And do you think that this normalization of relations between the US and Belarus. Do you think that is likely to spread? Do you think that European countries are going to follow that particular lead?
I think that Orban welcomes this. Maybe Fico does as well. That's about it in Europe. And, we've had the peculiar spectacle of the United States for the first time forever or ever, voting with rogue regimes like Russia, like China, like Belarus, like North Korea at the UN. That's happened a couple of times, at least this year.
The world is in a strange place. Thanks for talking us through that, John. John E. Herbst from the Atlantic Council.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Katia Glod has followed Belarus's crackdown on political opposition closely. She's an expert on Belarusian politics and human rights at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. Welcome to DW. How does the release of these 52 people fit in the overall context of political repression in Belarus?
Well, hello and thank you. It does fit into the political context in the sense that we see two simultaneous processes happening at the same time. The release of some political prisoners. We never know who will be released and on which grounds these political prisoners are released. We see during this recent release, we saw some important figures like well-known journalists and some well-known politicians, but we don't see the release of heavyweights like Maria Kolesnikova, for example. But at the same time, we see the second process, which is the continuation of repression. People are still being arrested daily. The human rights or main organization just reported another 8 arrests just today. So we see that some people are being released, whereas others are being arrested. So it's the impression that the situation is becoming better inside the country, but in fact, it's not really.
And why do you think Donald Trump has suddenly become so interested in this issue?
He's interested because he likes to make deals, and he can see that Belarus could be a convenient opportunity for that. He found understanding with President Lukashenko, who also wants to make a deal in order to become more relevant at home. He wants to regain legitimacy he lost in 2020. He wants to regain international legitimacy. He wants to take a part in potential Russia-Ukraine negotiations. And for President Trump, dealing with Lukashenko has proven easier than with President Putin. President Trump manages to increase his image, and releasing political prisoners in Belarus falls within his pattern of trying to release hostages, American hostages. Right. Take the example of Venezuela or hostages in Gaza, for example.
And is there any downside for Alexander Lukashenko in getting so close to the United States, given that he's also a close ally of Russia?
He does not break with the Kremlin's line. Whatever he does not harm Moscow. Lukashenko is still the president of a sovereign country, even if it's foreign policy, the country follows Russia's footsteps. But inside the country, releasing some political prisoners who, it's very important to understand, to underline this, these people are not allowed to stay in Belarus. They are forced into deportation and leaving the country, so they do not risk creating any unrest or any protest inside the country. So that does not really hurt the Kremlin. That's Lukashenko's personal view, as long as he follows Putin's line in foreign policy and defense.
And a word about the Belarusian opposition leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who's recognized by some countries as Belarus's rightful president. She has warned that easing US sanctions on Belarus could also benefit Russia. Do you also see that as a risk?
Yes, there is some risk, and therefore it's very important to have calibrated sanctions. And so far, that seems to have been the case. This is the first time that it was announced that the sanctions of the national air carrier will be lifted. Before that, prisoners were released without the lifting of the sanctions. And it's important that opening an embassy, having an ambassador in Belarus, or letting the Belarusian carriers' planes to be repaired abroad, that would be fine. That would not disturb sanctions against Moscow. Right. But what could disturb is lifting any economic sanctions, because Belarus and Russia are very integrated economically, and the same with regard to defense and military-industrial complex, as Belarus supports and produces certain products for the Russian military defense. And lifting the sanctions of Belarusian companies involved in defense, for example, or against Belarusian banks, which can also easily then trade instead of Russia, that right. would indeed harm the effect of the Western sanctions.
It's clearly one to watch. Thanks for talking us through that, Katia. Katia Glod from the Centre for European Policy Analysis.
Thank you.
All right, I want to bring in now Natalia, Smolentceva, who is standing by for us in our studio in Riga. Natalia, it's good to have you with us. Who are these people who have been released, and why are they being released now?
Well, this release is part of a deal between US and Belarus, and in exchange for those prisoners, US is lifting sanctions on one of Belarus' biggest airlines. We don't know exactly who are these people. There's 52 people who've crossed a border to Lithuania that we know from Lithuania's authorities. 14 from them are foreign nationals, citizens of Latvia, Poland, Germany, UK and France, and the rest are Belarusian citizens. Among those released, we hear is former presidential candidate Nikolai Statkevich. Many actually expected to see another high-profile political opponent of Lukashenko, Maria Kolesnikova, but we haven't seen any photos of her so far. Well, we also know that among those are journalists, politicians, activists who've been active during 2020 protests after presidential elections in Belarus. These have been the biggest protests in Belarusian history, and many of those people forced consequences. And this is actually only a fraction of people who are now in Belarusian prisons.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. It is only a fraction. It's only a fraction of the numbers that President Trump had requested just a month ago. Lukashenko has reportedly said that his main task is to stand with Trump. Why is Russia's closest ally seeking closer ties with the U.S.?
Well, I think both Russia and Belarus have a different approach to U.S. under President Donald Trump, because we've seen Putin meeting with Trump in Alaska, we've seen Putin talking to Trump on the phone, as well as Lukashenko. And I think both U.S. and Belarus are seeking something from this deal. So Lukashenko is... Well, Belarus is the country that's heavily under sanctions, even more than Russia, or even earlier as Russia, from 2020, after the protest I've just mentioned. And for Lukashenko, it's of course a great opportunity to lift at least some of these sanctions, and he might be hoping to lift even more of them, because he still has a lot of prisoners sitting there. And also, he has a friendship with President Putin. He's his closest ally, and also we've seen a lot of pictures, a lot of meetings between them. So President Trump might be hoping that Lukashenko can influence President Putin and help Trump reach what he's promised long ago, peace in Ukraine.
And Natalia, what is the Belarusian opposition saying about all of this?
Well, the leader of Belarusian opposition, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, is right now in Lithuania in front of the US embassy, waiting for those who've been released in these prisoners. And she said that, of course, she's grateful to President Trump for this. She's grateful for every prisoner that's released. But it's only 4% of those who are still behind bars, political prisoners who are still behind bars in Belarus. I want to remind that it's 5th prisoners exchange this year, and actually in the last one in June, her husband Sergei Tikhanovsky was also released. So for her, it's also a very personal story of all those prisoners coming out. But she says it's no sign of Lukashenko changing his mind, changing his political rule. So we don't have to be fooled by it. And lifting of sanctions can also be pretty dangerous because it can let Lukashenko rule longer, or it can also help Putin circumvent sanctions that exist against Russia.
DW's Natalia Smolentceva. Natalia, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you. All right, I want to bring in our Riga bureau chief, Juri Rescheto. He's following this for us. Juri, who are these people who have been released, and why were they released now?
Well, the release of the prisoners is certainly the result of a deal brand between US President Trump and Belarusian leader Lukashenko. Those released are people who have been imprisoned in Belarusian prisons behind bars for years for political reasons. Official, of course, they were punished for other reasons, mostly accused of treason or state terrorism. According to media reports, they include prominent politician Statkevich, philosopher Mackiewicz, and citizens of other countries. Many of them were put behind bars after the protests in 2020 and 2021. At that time, people across the country, across Belarus, took to the streets in huge numbers to protest against what the West considered to be a manipulated presidential election against the ruler Alexander Lukashenko.
Lukashenko, he has reportedly said that his main task is to stand with Trump. Why is Russia's closest ally seeking closer ties with the U.S.?
I think both want to benefit from each other. Lukashenko has always been seen as someone who wanted to do business with both Russia and the West. Belarus has long been considered Europe's last dictatorship and has suffered Western sanctions, including US sanctions, for even longer than Russia. At the same time, Lukashenko is considered one of the closest allies of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Both have been in power for many, many years. Lukashenko even longer than Putin, for over 30 years. And during this time, Brand, both have focused on close cooperation between Russia and Belarus, politically, economically and militarily. Putin and Lukashenko are also linked by what appears to be a personal friendship, at least from the outside. The two met recently. US President Trump knows this. Trump wants to influence Putin to end the war in Ukraine, but Trump hasn't been successful so far. He is now apparently trying to influence Putin with Lukashenko's help and finally achieve what he has long promised, peace in Ukraine.
Yeah, fascinating. Juri Rescheto there with the latest from Riga. Juri, as always, thank you.
Now, Lithuania is boosting border security ahead of joint Russian and Belarusian military drills that are about to start in neighbouring Belarus. The exercises are called Zapad, meaning west, and will be the first time Russia field tests its latest ballistic missiles. With fears over possible Russian aggression on the rise, Lithuania's army is taking no chances. Our correspondent, Lisa Louis, went to the border between Lithuania and Belarus to find out more.
Patrols like these will be far more frequent than usual over the coming days. These soldiers have received extra training to prepare for potential border transgressions during the first Russian-Belarusian military drills since the start of the war in Ukraine in 2022.
Now Russia is much more seriously taken as a possible aggressor. Well, we preparing for a very broad range of provocations. Those might be use of migrants, aggressive actions at the border against border guards by migrants, when the migrants are being instructed by Belarusian to be very aggressive, to use different tools to attack border guards. Those might be also use of drones.
Like drills of the past, thousands of Russian and Belarusian soldiers will test military equipment, such as tanks, drones and machine guns. But this time, they'll also be trained to use Russia's new hypersonic, nuclear-capable ballistic missile Rescheto. The exercises will bring back painful memories for many Lithuanians.
Lithuania knows firsthand what a Russian invasion would mean. Until 1991, the country was under Russian occupation as part of the Soviet Union.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has raised fears Lithuania could be next. The country has more than doubled its defence spending since 2021 to over 5% of GDP next year. Experts say the upcoming drills could also raise the threat level in the long run.
Russia perceives us as countries, more as territories that should be under Kremlin's direct or indirect control. What we are going to be looking for is certainly whether those troops that are going to be in Belarus or around Belarus are going to be staying there after the exercise, whether Russia is really increasing its presence on the Belarusian soil, including the infrastructure, and possibly preparing for some scenarios in 2, 5, 7 or 10 years.
The inhabitants of these Lithuanian villages next to the border are somehow used to such drills that have been happening regularly since 2009. But to some of them, this year's exercises feel more frightening than ever.
We all fear that this war will soon come to us. We are afraid, really afraid.
Nothing bad has happened where we are. It's nice and peaceful here.
With Russia clearly showing an expansionist agenda, these fears are unlikely to dissipate anytime soon. Fears that this border could at some point become Lithuania's first line of defence.